This is Sarge Summers with Sarge's Industry Solutions.
Perfect. And it's called Sarge's Industry Solutions is the name of your company?
That's right.
And what is that company, Sarge's Industry Solutions?
Well, it started out as a consulting business, but it's morphed over into more of a company where we represent different customers' products and or services.
Okay, I see. Are you kind of like a salesman then? As kind of a sales, marketing, a connector, that sort of thing?
We do. We open doors.
Open
we
doors.
Open doors. Yep.
Do you close them too? You know, everybody loves a closer.
I'm very good at closing. I've been in sales since I was 5 years old. So yeah, I'm good at closing.
What kind of sales did you start at 5 years old?
You know, I started selling newspapers on the streets in a small town in Oklahoma. I was one of 16 members of our family, and so we all started working at a very early age. In my case, I was 5 years old.
Sure. Yeah, I can relate. I was 10. I started a newspaper route myself. Obviously did some odd jobs before then, but in terms of consistent pay, and I still attribute that to a lot to today, because what that taught me at a young age was distribution. That
Sure.
the newspaper industry really had a heck of a distribution system. They were going door to door just like the mailmen were.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and so what I did when I think I was 12, I started handing out flyers that I would cut lawns while I delivered the newspaper, and look at that, turned in multiple revenue streams by the time I was 12 years old. Now if I could only learn what I knew then, what's going on?
So I hear what you're saying.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit. Actually, that's one of the reasons why I brought you on the program today, is to talk about the dynamics and the changing, everything that's happened in sales, especially. I read an article the other day where the number one preferred way for people to communicate now is text or email. Before they even, and phone was like 100. To call somebody on the phone was like listed after, singing it in song. So I mean, it was just almost. People try not to talk or go face-to-face anymore, and I was wondering if this was that much of a growing trend in the sales world too, or if that's like just a case of millennials today, or what's going on. So what are you experiencing in your world in terms of how people are communicating? Are people picking up the phone and talking, or do they like the text and email first?
Yeah, obviously email has been around for a long time, and we've used that. But I would say texting is becoming quickly the preferred method, either that or instant messaging. And at one time that was considered taboo. There was no way in the world that you would send a text to a customer or a prospective customer, but that has definitely changed over time. And I do a lot of texting, and I'm old school, if you will. I'm 66 years old. But have been in the industry now for 27 years after a full military career of 21 years in the Army. But texting's the way to go, I think.
So that's one of the things I've noticed is the evolution of just the whole sales call, if you will, from the old days of, door-to-door sales. And then, of course, it went to phone sales. And then now it seems like, so is there texting, what are those robocalls? Is there robo text going on? I suppose there probably is, isn't there?
There is.
Oh, is there really? I was being ridiculous, but okay.
Yeah, no, we're starting to see some of that as well, unfortunately. And one of the things that you didn't mention was the cold calls, and that doesn't work real well these days. It used to be fine, and I still do it on occasion, but on a very rare occasion.
That is one thing I think a lot of people have really forgot is the art of selling and how much has changed. And nowadays it almost seems really important to get people face-to-face, because if you can get them face-to-face, there's probably a pretty good chance you can get their business these days, because it's so hard to get people face-to-face.
Absolutely. You see, I believe that the phone is a tool just to get the appointment. And that's all I use the telephone for, is to get the appointment. And then once I get the appointment and I have that face-to-face, it just seems to work so much better. Yeah,
it really does. And, of course, you've worked in the oil and gas industry, and talk about an industry that still wants to press the flesh and, and see your eyeballs at least once a year, huh?
Absolutely, and I'm still in the industry, so.
Yeah, talk to me a little bit about that because we talked about the general sales part of it, but in the oil and gas industry, that whole industry's changed. Hydraulic fracturing, horizontal drilling has made businesses rewrite their business plan. And then I talked to the saltwater guy yesterday, and their numbers keep coming in more projected higher than they thought. So that industry's still tweaking a little bit. Of course, you got the frac sand. That got competitive. Right. Boy, these environmental guys, they're going to kill each other by the end of the day. That's turning into the Hatfield-McCoy industry. So, you know what I mean? It's like the whole industry is going through these ripples of changes. So I thought having a sales guy to talk a little bit about, we have to do things a little bit differently in sales now too would maybe help some people out. So talk to me about how you've approached the oil and gas industry specifically when it comes to sales over the last 10 years.
Okay. Well, one of the things that I do is I make sure that I attend all of the important, trade shows and/or conferences across the United States, especially those that are in oil and gas shale play areas like West Texas, the Permian Basin, up in the Bakken, the Marcellus and the Utica, down in the Eagle Ford Shale, down in South Texas. And so I think it's important that what we do is stay in front of those clients at all times, at all levels. And that's where a lot of salespeople or business development people really miss out, is they believe that they only need to call at one level in the strata, if you will, but they need to be calling at all levels, because what happens is you've got influencers maybe at the very lowest level out there where they're drilling, at the drill site where they're spudding in the well. And so those individuals influence the decision that the corporate folks make. I know there's different layers along the way, different levels of leadership, if you will, but it's important that we call on all the different levels and that we use all the influence that is available to us in our sphere of influence.
How well do you use social media? That's how you and I connected, was on social media. How's that working for somebody in the world of sales?
Well, I think it works extremely well. When I first got into it about 6 years ago, I had a young engineer that had graduated from the Air Force Academy and gone on to the University of Texas and received his MBA. And he kept saying to me, Sarge, the way that you like to mentor young people, you need to be on LinkedIn. And I said, no, I don't. I looked at it as being something like, at that time, MySpace or Facebook. And I said, I'm not interested in that. Well, he stayed on me, and I was president of the Society of American Military Engineers for the Nashville, Tennessee post at that time. And so he finally convinced me, and I got on there, and I said, well, I'll just give it a test. Because what happened, there was a customer, I don't guess I'm allowed to say the name of the customer, but I had a customer in the oil and gas industry that I wanted to do some work for, but I couldn't get past the gatekeeper. And so what I did is I went ahead and got on LinkedIn and got an appointment, went over to San Antonio, had the appointment, walked away with a request for quotation, and it ended up getting a job for over $20 million up in the Bakken. And trust me, from that time forward, I was a big time believer, and now I have well over 11,000 connections on LinkedIn.
I tell you, I was the same way with LinkedIn. I purposely didn't go on LinkedIn until, I want to say, a little over a year ago. 2018 was the first year I was on LinkedIn.
Right.
And same reason, I was not a big social media guy, and being in the media, a lot of times we had to just draw a line in the sand and figure out, okay, I'm not getting paid by anybody to do this, but yet now I got to do 50% of my day to this. This is not adding up right. And so we just kind of went off it. We did, we made some changes because we went through a number of changes. In fact, we don't even do advertising anymore. That's how we made our change in our business model, was we don't do advertising anymore. We're focused on distribution and content creation. So, right. Yeah, and so we had to come up with something completely new, and social media really helped us. LinkedIn is what opened my eyes to that, as it did with you, it was not like the other social medias. This one actually helped your business, and people wanted to be there, and they wanted to use it for business reasons, not, to show how their dog's latest trick is doing, which I don't mind, by the way, but people leave that off of LinkedIn. They don't seem to put those on there. But so the social media you found to be pretty pretty advantageous. But the one thing that I found was that LinkedIn was primarily heavy on oil and gas users versus the other social media platforms. And it sounds like you experienced the same.
Yes, yeah, I took full advantage of that, and I'm really amazed sometimes at the people that will respond to your LinkedIn request. For example, there was one gentleman who at one time was the president of one of the major oil and gas companies here in the United States. And I just thought, well, it won't hurt to send him an invite. And I put a little note with it and told him that I was a military veteran and that I would love to connect with him on LinkedIn. And he came back and accepted that. I was shocked. It took about a month. And then I asked him if we could meet over breakfast. It took about another month, and he came back and gave me 2 dates, 2 times, and 2 locations for a 30-minute breakfast. And 2.5 hours later, we walked out of there, and he told me, he said, I don't normally accept invitations like this, but I just had to find out who that Sarge Summers guy was. So it works. It works.
Great name, yeah. Sarge Summers, it's right in the name. Alliteration, everything. Of course, everybody loves summer vacation, so it's just got a good ring to it, and yeah. Yep. And we've noticed the same thing where we've gotten access to a lot of CEOs, a lot of presidents who have followed our content and subscribed to our newsletters and things like that I don't think we would have gotten otherwise.
Right.
Agree with you at the conferences. After that 2012, 2013, when the kind of the rock star appeal of the Shale Play USA kind of went down, the executives, you had to start going to the conferences to find these guys now because they were not touring anymore. You know what I mean?
That's true.
Yeah, they weren't just kind of going. You mentioned you did some business up in the Bakken. Where at in the Bakken? Where are you doing business?
Williston, primarily in the Williston area. That's where we built 4 above-ground storage tanks, and it was over $20 million worth of work. And the project took a long time. Obviously, went through 4 different seasons, which up there can be brutal, right? And but it was an above-ground storage tank company that I represent. I represent about 15 different companies currently, and so it was one of those companies, and turned out to be a really, really great project for my client.
So what kind of, by the way, Sarge Summers, Sarge's Industry Solutions, primarily he's a connector, he's a door opener, he's a salesman, modern day, new age salesman. What type of business, I guess, do you connect? What type of clients do you serve? Just go ahead and give yourself a plug for some of the things in oil and gas that you're doing. Maybe some of the clients either you're representing, may or may not mention their names, up to you, all that type of thing. But just kind of give people a flavor of what that sales side of things is.
Well, given the opportunity, I'd love to mention some of the names of some of my clients. I have Caldwell Tanks out of Louisville, Kentucky, and they've been in business for about 140 years. And they do above-ground storage tanks, ASTs. I call them MITBs, which is money in the bank. And so they do that. They do elevated water towers and pre-stressed concrete tanks. I have another customer out of Longview called Tri-W Global, and they build ASME pressure vessel equipment for flowback out in the upstream. And then I have 4 inspection companies. Each one does something different. I have a coatings and linings company. And most of these companies that I represent are not in the Houston area, and hence the need for representation here locally. And with the relationships that I've built over the last 27 years, it's pretty easy for me to get into the boardroom, get in with all of the key decision makers in order to introduce my clients to them, and also get opportunities for projects. And so that's what I do. I go out and get these requests for quotations for my clients, and then they bid the work, and then hopefully they get the majority of that work. And it's something that's a little bit new. I had the president of IMTT out of New Orleans. He called me early one morning and he said, "Sarge, you're the only guy that I know that's doing what you're doing in the industry." And I corrected him just a little bit, and I said, "No, I'm the only guy doing what I'm doing the way I do it." And so I started my company a little over 3 years ago. I was 22 days shy of my 63rd birthday, and I figured if Colonel Sanders could do it, then I could do it. The difference is he had the recipe.
Yeah. Well, that's about 3-4 years ago when I started seeing the need and the shift for specific sales companies because of a lot of times, if they had access to certain people, or a lot of times people just didn't have the time to do some of those tedious sales skills that are needed. And so I've seen a couple of these companies like yours just pop up, and they got a handful of clients, but the idea is that they're basically a sales department, and they're out there, they're hustling, good old Charlie Hustle type of a thing. Because surprisingly, a lot of engineers are more linear thinkers. They're not abstract thinkers, especially especially engineers. We once had an engineer in our sales company. He didn't sell a thing, but he told us the best way to travel with a vehicle. If you go over like 250 miles, you should always rent it, and he had it down to the penny. Some great math. Delineation, but not much in the creative department, that's for sure. So
that's right. Well, one of the things too that I would suggest as it relates to LinkedIn, what I do is I try to set my schedule for 6 weeks in advance. In other words, I'll say I'm going to be in West Texas with the Permian Basin or the Delaware Basin, or I'm going to be in Dallas or Oklahoma City or the Northeast or the Northwest. And what I'll do is I'll just plug that into my calendar, and then I'll start filling my appointments 6 weeks in advance. So I know where I'm going to be 6 weeks from now. And so when I go on LinkedIn, I will go in there and do a specific filter search, and I will find all of the clients that I have, for example, that are in the Permian Basin, which right now for me would be well over 1,000 customers. And so I never hurt. And then if I have a cancellation, I'm able to backfill that cancellation. And the other thing that I like to do is if it's within 8 hours of my home base here in Houston or Kingwood, I like to make that drive, because when I'm in the air at 37,000 feet in that airplane that was built by the lowest bidder, I'm looking down over areas where I really need to be stopping in and seeing customers. So I try to drive as much as I possibly can.
I agree with you on the driving, a lot of windshield time. Of course, I love to hear that, somebody who produces podcasts, because we've done very well with our podcast numbers in the oil patch because of those reasons. I mean, as well as I do, sometimes it takes 2-3 hours just to get to a well site, let alone a meeting. And, and that means there's a lot of executives as well as a lot of, people who work on the well. There's a lot of diverse people who are now open to podcasts, and they need their hands and their eyes to drive, so it works out pretty nicely on that.
Absolutely. I want to share something else with you, if you'll allow me. One of the things that I think about a lot and have for a lot of years is the sales cycle. We talk about the sales cycle, and it involves everything, and it's a never-ending circle, obviously, and follow-up is one of the key things. I mean, we talk about getting the appointment and showing up for the appointment, doing the PowerPoint presentation, death by PowerPoint in some cases, but everything right to the follow-up and beyond. But one of the things that I like to do is I like to shorten or abbreviate things where I can, and so I've come up with a formula called FEBA. That's FEBA, FEBA, and in the military that would stand for the forward edge of the battle area, but in the sales process it's facts, evidence, benefit, and agreement. And this is an easy way for a salesperson to calm their nerves, if you will, when they first go in to see a customer, and also keep them on track with their sales message. So, they go in and they share the facts about the companies that they're representing. They give the evidence. That can be anything. It can be brochures. It can be a website. It can be a PowerPoint presentation. It can be a satisfied customer, anything like that. And then the benefits, you want to point out the benefit to the potential client, what the benefit is to them and to their company. And many of these guys receive their annual bonuses based on how much money they save their company, and so it's easy to share share that benefit. And then the last step, and maybe the most important step, is to get that person shaking their head north and south. In other words, saying yes. And so that's a simple method that a lot of these folks can use. I do a lot of public speaking around the country and overseas, and so I get to go in and do motivational talks for different companies and stuff like that. And I work upstream, midstream, and downstream, and I never ever thought that would happen, but that's where I'm at today.
Anything that we missed? Anything we want to reiterate? Anything that we want to make sure we talk about here before we get going with our other days, I guess, that we're talking about when it comes to modern day sales, some of the changes that have happened, and specifically even when it comes to the oil and gas industry?
Yeah, I would just say the only other thing that I'd like to mention at this point is never assume. Don't assume that you're not going to get the opportunity to close a sale. And then also during the sales process, when you're doing your trial closes and the customer comes up with an objection, the important thing there is not to shut down, but the important thing is to make sure that you've identified what the true objection is, because a lot of times they'll throw up a smoke screen, and so you can just restate what they have given you as an objection and make sure that you've got the crosshairs properly on what the real objection is. Many times they just don't have the authority to buy.
And Sarge Summers, how can people get in touch and contact you if they want your sales services and it's Sarge's Industry Solutions services?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And they can reach me on my cell phone would probably be the best way. That way they can either call or text. I love the text. My number is 832-544-6836. And my email address is sarge@industrysolutions, that's plural, .com.